Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with this. Politics in America has always been unpredictable, but the scale of Donald Trump's current troubles is far greater than even seasoned observers like myself could have anticipated. When we talk about Trump, we're not just talking about a former president. We're talking about a man who has become a symbol of deep political polarization, a reflection of America's economic inequality, and a lightning rod for both hope and resentment. And yet, what we are seeing unfold right now goes beyond politics, beyond ideology. It is the culmination of years of choices, gambles, and a system that is now catching up with him. You see, the expectation was that Trump, with his usual bravado and ability to shift narratives, would maneuver past legal challenges, past accusations, past the political storms that have followed him since before he entered the White House. But here's the hook. The trouble has multiplied, not diminished. Legal battles are mounting, financial pressure is increasing, and the political support that once seemed unshakable is showing cracks. And when a man who thrives on strength begins to look cornered, that's when the story changes dramatically. Let's be clear, this is not just about Donald Trump as an individual. This is about what he represents in America's social and political landscape. His troubles are not occurring in a vacuum. They are taking place in an economy where wages have stagnated, where inflation bites hard, and where ordinary Americans feel more betrayed than ever by elites of both parties. Trump tapped into that anger. He positioned himself as the outsider, the fighter, the businessman who knew how to fix it. But now the fighter finds himself surrounded, and the crowd is beginning to ask whether he can keep delivering the punches or if he's about to be knocked down himself. Think of it this way: every indictment, every lawsuit, every subpoena is not just a legal procedure. It's a test of whether Trump can maintain the illusion of invincibility. And illusions matter in politics. The moment people stop believing you're untouchable, the moment they begin to think you're vulnerable, everything changes. Allies hesitate, donors pull back, and opponents smell blood. That's the reality of power. And Donald Trump, for all his experience in branding and self-promotion, is learning the hard way that the system he once bent to his advantage is now pressing back against him harder than ever. Now, why does this matter to you, the American public? Because Trump's troubles are not just his, they are ours. They reflect the instability of a political system that allowed a figure like Trump to rise in the first place, and now struggles with how to deal with him as he falls. They expose the fragility of our institutions, the partisanship of our media, and the inability of either party to address the real grievances that gave Trump his base. In other words, his trouble is a mirror held up to the trouble of America itself. So, as we watch this play out, remember this: Donald Trump is in much more trouble than anyone expected, not just legally, not just politically, but symbolically. The myth of Trump, the untouchable, Trump the winner, Trump the strongman, that myth is unraveling before our very eyes. And once that myth is gone, what remains may not only reshape his future, but the future of American politics for years to come. Donald Trump's mounting legal troubles are not just another chapter. In his long history of controversies, they represent a turning point in how power, accountability, and politics intersect in the United States. For years, Trump cultivated an aura of invincibility. He was the businessman who bent rules to his advantage, the politician who broke every norm and somehow came out stronger. But what we are witnessing today is something different, something far heavier. The number of indictments, investigations, and lawsuits surrounding him is staggering, and it raises a crucial question: can a figure who has thrived on projecting strength survive when the legal system itself has turned its full attention on him? The hook here is simply, the more the legal pressure mounts, the more it exposes vulnerabilities that were long hidden beneath the surface of Trump's bravado. Courtrooms are not campaign rallies. Judges are not political opponents who can be ridiculed or intimidated with nicknames and insults. Evidence does not bend as easily as a media headline or a soundbite. And that is where the trouble deepens. Trump is entering arenas where his usual tactics, bluster, delay, and denial, may no longer protect him. Each new case is like a domino, not only threatening his personal freedom and wealth, but also reshaping the perception of him among his base, his party, and the broader electorate. Let us remember something important: legal troubles have political consequences. Every indictment, every subpoena, every televised hearing becomes part of a larger narrative. And that narrative matters in America, where image often determines political survival as much as substance. When voters and supporters begin to associate a leader with endless court battles, they start asking themselves whether that leader is still the fighter they believed in, or whether he has become a liability. The danger for Trump is not just what judges and juries will decide. It is what millions of Americans watching this legal theater will conclude about him. Consider the scale of what is unfolding. He is not dealing with a single investigation, but multiple, stretching across state and federal jurisdictions. The range of issues: business fraud, election interference, mishandling of classified documents, creates an impression of chaos, a web too complex for even his most loyal defenders to dismiss entirely as witch hunts. This accumulation is what makes his situation unprecedented. One scandal he could spin, two he could fight, but dozens. That begins to look less like persecution and more like a pattern, a reality that his opponents will hammer and his supporters will quietly struggle to ignore. Now, here's the critical hook. Trump's entire political brand has always rested on the claim that he is a winner, a man who bends the system but never breaks under it. If the legal system manages to pierce that image, if juries or judges hand down rulings that stick, then the mythology of Trump, the untouchable, begins to collapse. And once the myth collapses, political power collapses with it. Because in politics, strength is not just about policy, it is about perception. The moment Trump looks weak, the moment he looks cornered, the entire foundation of his influence begins to shake. There is also the question of timing. These legal proceedings are unfolding in the midst of an election cycle where every headline, every court date, every ruling is amplified 100 times over. Imagine a candidate who must split his time between rallies and depositions, between debates and defense strategies. That is not a recipe for victory. It is a recipe for fatigue, both for the man himself and for the movement that surrounds him. And fatigue is dangerous because it creates space for rivals, both within his party and outside of it, to step forward and claim that mantle of leadership. What makes this moment so extraordinary is not just that Trump is in legal jeopardy, but that the very system he once manipulated is now pressing back against him. The courts, the prosecutors, the evidence, these are not elements he can easily tweet away or dismiss with a slogan. They represent a force larger than him, and for the first time, he is discovering what it feels like to face pressure that cannot be redirected or ignored. That is why his troubles are more serious than many expected. The man who once seemed immune to consequence is now entangled in consequences of his own making, and the American public is watching with both fascination and unease. And here lies the greatest hook. Of all Trump's legal troubles are not just about Trump. They are about America's confrontation with power, privilege, and the limits of accountability. If someone who has lived so long above the law can finally be held to account, what does that say about the future of politics in this country? And if he cannot, if he escapes once again, what message does that send to every future leader who believes they too can bend the system to their will? That tension, that uncertainty is why these troubles are so explosive, why they resonate far beyond one man's fate, and why they may reshape American politics for years to come. When Donald Trump first rose to dominance in the Republican Party, his grip on the base and his ability to intimidate rivals created the illusion that his political support was unshakable. He transformed the party in his image, pushing aside veteran figures and reshaping the platform around his personal brand of populism, nationalism, and defiance. For years, it seemed like nothing could loosen that hold, not scandals, not impeachment, not even a riot at the Capitol. Yet, the cracks that are now beginning to show in his political support are far more significant than many expected, and they reveal a deeper story about the fragility of loyalty in American politics. The first hook here is this loyalty in politics is conditional. It survives as long as it serves the ambitions of those who give it. Trump's allies stood behind him when he looked like the strongest vehicle for their own power. But as his troubles mount, the calculation changes. Republicans who once shouted his name on stage now whisper doubts behind closed doors. Donors who once wrote checks without hesitation are quietly redirecting funds. The very foundation of Trump's support, that aura of inevitability, is beginning to fracture. It is worth noting that Trump still commands immense loyalty from a large portion of the Republican base. Millions of voters remain firmly behind him, convinced that he alone represents their frustration with elites, globalization, and a political system they feel has ignored them. But here's the danger for Trump. Political support is not just about voters. It's also about the machinery of a party, the strategists, the donors, the governors, the lawmakers who decide whether to throw their weight behind a candidate or look for alternatives. And when that machinery senses weakness, it begins to consider other options. One of the clearest signs of these cracks is the emergence of rivals within his own party who no longer fear him as they once did. During his presidency, few Republicans dared to openly challenge him, terrified of his ability to rally supporters against them. Today, however, the legal troubles, the financial burdens, and the constant media firestorms have changed the calculus. Ambitious Republicans see a path forward for themselves, and they sense that Trump's dominance may not be permanent. That's why figures who once stayed silent are now testing the waters with subtle critiques, carefully positioning themselves as the next generation without fully breaking with Trump's base. Here's another hook. The erosion of political support does not happen in dramatic explosions. It happens quietly, gradually, until suddenly the foundation is too weak to hold. Trump may still fill stadiums, but behind the scenes, doubts multiply. Lawmakers calculate whether attaching themselves too closely to him might cost them elections in swing districts. Donors question whether investing in Trump is a sound bet or a sinking ship. Allies begin to wonder if their future lies in clinging to him or in distancing themselves before it's too late. These are the invisible cracks that, once they widen, can split a political movement apart. The trouble for Trump is that politics is not just about having supporters, it's about momentum. A campaign thrives on the sense that victory is inevitable, that the candidate is marching forward with unstoppable force. When momentum stalls, when doubts creep in, when headlines shift from triumphs to trials, that sense of inevitability evaporates. And once it's gone, it is extraordinarily difficult to recapture. Trump, who once seemed untouchable, now faces the very real prospect of looking vulnerable. And vulnerability in politics attracts challengers like blood in the water attracts sharks. Let us not underestimate the symbolic power of cracks in support. For years, Trump's opponents and critics hoped for that one big event that would topple his dominance. But politics rarely works that way. Instead, it erodes slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the change is undeniable. A governor here declines to endorse him. A senator there voices discomfort with his rhetoric. A major donor quietly shifts allegiance. At first, these seem like small acts of dissent, but collectively, they signal something far larger: the confidence in Trump's ability to carry the movement forward is no longer absolute. What makes this particularly dangerous for Trump is that his entire political project rests on the perception of strength. His brand is built not just on policies, but on the idea that he commands total loyalty, that he leads with such force that the party cannot move without him. Once cracks appear, that illusion weakens. And when it weakens, even those who still support him begin to question how long he can endure. The moment his allies stop believing he can win, many will stop standing with him at all. And that is the real hook. The cracks in Trump's political comport are not just about losing allies. They are about losing the narrative of inevitability that has fueled his entire rise. When loyalty becomes conditional, when allies hesitate, when momentum stalls, the very power that sustained him begins to unravel. What we are seeing is not the collapse of his movement, but the beginning of a slow, dangerous erosion that could prove more devastating than any single scandal or indictment. Trump's financial troubles are an undercurrent of his political story that too many people overlook. Yet they may prove to be just as damaging as his legal and political problems. For decades, Donald Trump cultivated the image of the wealthy mogul, the self-made businessman who could finance his own rise and bend the economy to his will. That image was central to his political brand. He wasn't just a politician, he was the billionaire outsider, the man who didn't need the system, because he had already mastered it. But here's the hook. What we are seeing today is a Trump who is increasingly strained by mounting financial pressure, and that reality threatens to shatter one of the most important myths he has built around himself. Every lawsuit, every indictment, every courtroom appearance carries with it not only political costs, but financial ones. Lawyers, legal teams, settlements, these are not cheap. And when you are facing multiple cases across several jurisdictions, the bills climb rapidly into the tens of millions. For most politicians, that kind of pressure would be unbearable. But even for someone of Trump's stature, this is no small burden. What makes it especially damaging is that Trump's financial empire has always been more fragile than he portrayed. Much of his brand has rested on borrowed money, leveraged assets, and the appearance of success rather than the solid foundation of consistent profitability. Legal troubles pierce that illusion, forcing closer scrutiny, and scrutiny is the last thing Trump wants. The hook here is this: financial strain undermines credibility. Trump's supporters admire him not only for his politics, but for his supposed success in business. The idea that he is a master negotiator, a man who always wins, is tied to his wealth and his deals. If lawsuits, penalties, and mounting debts begin to suggest otherwise, then his image as the businessman president begins to unravel. When the man who claimed he could make America rich again is struggling to keep his own empire afloat, the contradiction becomes hard to ignore even for loyal followers. Consider also the role of donors. Politics, especially at the presidential level, is fueled by money. While Trump once bragged about self-financing, the truth is his campaigns have relied heavily on donations. Legal bills are now diverting millions from campaign coffers into defense funds, creating frustration among donors who thought their contributions were going toward defeating Democrats. Not paying lawyers. This tension matters. When donors feel their money is being wasted, they hesitate to give again. And when new candidates emerge, they suddenly look like safer investments. That financial erosion is not just about dollars. It's about momentum and morale. Another angle is the way financial pressure ripples outward. Trump's businesses are not insulated from his political struggles. In fact, they are directly tied to them. Investigations into fraud, inflated valuations, and questionable practices put his companies at risk of losing contracts, licenses, and partnerships. Banks may hesitate to extend credit investors may think twice. These are the quiet, behind the scenes consequences that don't always make headlines, but can hollow out an empire over time. And if Trump's businesses weaken, his ability to project himself as the ultimate winner weakens with them. Here's another hook. Trump's financial troubles are not just personal, they are symbolic. They expose the broader issue of how wealth and power function in America. For decades, Trump personified the marriage of money and influence, using one to secure the other. If his finances now collapse under the weight of legal and political stress, it raises a broader question. How sustainable is a system that allows individuals to rise by inflating illusions of wealth and then collapse when those illusions are tested? His financial struggles become a mirror of a larger economic truth, that the appearance of success can be more fragile than it seems. And there is the matter of timing. Once again, these financial pressures are not occurring in some distant future. They are happening right in the middle of his bid for political survival. Campaigns demand money, legal defenses demand money, and maintaining the image of wealth demands money. Trump is trying to juggle all three simultaneously, and cracks are starting to show. Every dollar spent defending himself is a dollar not spent on ads, rallies, or organization. Every report of financial strain feeds the narrative that the empire is crumbling. And in politics, perception often matters more than reality. The real danger here is cumulative. Legal costs stack on top of political losses. Business setbacks compound with campaign challenges. Financial pressure intensifies the sense of vulnerability, and vulnerability erodes the very foundation of Trump's image. The man who once claimed he was too rich to be bought is now relying on donors to keep both his campaign and his legal defenses alive. That irony is not lost on his critics, and over time, it won't be lost on his supporters either. So the hook is undeniable. Trump's financial troubles are not just background noise, they are central to the unraveling of his myth. The billionaire mogul who built his brand on strength and success is now visibly strained. His empire under scrutiny, his donors restless, his resources divided. And in politics, once that illusion cracks, it rarely repairs itself. What we are witnessing is not just a man fighting legal battles, but a man straining to hold together the very image of wealth and power that made him who he is. Donald Trump has always thrived on projecting an image of strength, dominance, and invulnerability. From his earliest days in business to his years in politics, the brand he cultivated was not simply about wealth or leadership, but about being untouchable. He presented himself as the man who never loses, who defies the odds, who bends institutions but is never bent by them. That myth has been central to his success because it reassured his supporters that they were standing behind a giant, someone who could take on the establishment and walk away victorious. But here's the hook. What we are witnessing now is the slow erosion of that untouchable image, and it may be the most dangerous development for him yet. Politics, at its core, is built on perception. A candidate does not merely win votes by policies alone. They win by convincing people they are strong enough to carry those policies through. Trump understood that better than most. He made his bravado, his refusal to apologize, his ability to mock and dominate opponents into a political weapon. That weapon worked because people believed it. They believed he was too strong to be stopped, too clever to be cornered, too resilient to be broken. The unraveling of that belief strikes at the very heart of his political power. The hook here is simply, once the aura of invincibility cracks, it rarely recovers. Every headline about indictments, every photograph of him entering a courthouse, every report of allies questioning his future chips away at the myth. For his supporters, even those fiercely loyal, these images force uncomfortable questions. Can this man still win? Is he still the fighter we believed in? For his opponents, the erosion of the untouchable image is a signal to push harder, to press the attack, to drive home the narrative that the once giant is now vulnerable. Politics is merciless in that way. It preys on weakness, or even the perception of it. Consider the way Trump once wielded this aura. Rivals in the Republican Party were afraid to challenge him because they believed he could destroy their careers with a single tweet. Media outlets devoted endless coverage to his statements because they seemed to come from a man who was rewriting the rules of politics. Supporters dismissed scandals because they believed he would outmaneuver them, just as he had outmaneuvered every opponent before. But as legal cases multiply and as cracks in his political support grow, the fear that once protected him is no longer absolute. Rivals now see opportunities. Donors weigh alternatives, and voters hear the whisper of vulnerability. That whisper is powerful. It changes the entire dynamic of a political movement. Here's another hook. Trump's image as untouchable has not just been about his personal survival. It has been about the survival of the larger movement around him. Make America Great Again was not just a slogan. It was anchored in the belief that Trump himself was strong enough to deliver it. If he falters, if he looks like a man who can be beaten, then the movement itself risks losing energy. Supporters rally behind leaders they think are winners. The danger is not simply that Trump faces legal or political setbacks, but that his followers might begin to feel they are backing a man who is slipping from that pedestal. That shift in psychology can change everything. The erosion of invincibility also matters for the broader narrative in American politics. Trump sold himself as the ultimate outsider who could take on Washington, win, because the rules didn't apply to him. That was intoxicating for millions of Americans who felt powerless. But as judges, prosecutors, and investigations continue to close in, the image of the man above the rules begins to collapse. Suddenly, he looks less like the system breaker and more like another politician bogged down by scandals, lawsuits, and vulnerability. That's not just a personal blow to Trump. It reshapes the myth his movement has been built on. Timing makes this even more dramatic. These cracks in his image are appearing at a moment when he needs the aura of strength more than ever, running for office while fighting legal battles demands a leader who looks unstoppable. Yet, each courtroom appearance undermines that very appearance of dominance. Imagine a candidate who must stand on stage claiming he is the strongest leader for America, while millions of viewers have just seen him walk into a courthouse surrounded by lawyers. That contradiction is powerful, and it undermines the story he wants to tell about himself. The irony, of course, is that Trump himself built his career by understanding the importance of image. He knew that success in business was as much about perception as it was about profit. He knew that politics could be won by theater as much as policy. But when the theater turns against you, when the perception begins to erode, there is very little you can do to stop it. He cannot shout down indictments. He cannot nickname away court rulings. He cannot project strength when the evidence of weakness is broadcast daily across every media platform. And here's the final hook. The collapse of the untouchable image is not about one moment, but about accumulation. It is not one scandal, one indictment, one loss. It is the steady drip of vulnerability, the slow unraveling of the myth, the gradual realization that the man who once seemed too big to fall is, in fact, falling. That erosion is far more devastating than any single defeat because it reshapes how everyone, from supporters to rivals to institutions, calculates their relationship to him. When the giant looks smaller, when the untouchable looks touchable, the entire game changes. And that, more than any legal ruling or political contest, may determine Trump's fate. Donald Trump's troubles cannot be understood in isolation from the larger context of the United States. To focus only on the man is to miss the deeper story unfolding beneath his rise and potential fall. Trump is not simply an individual facing legal, financial, and political challenges. He is a reflection of America's deeper crisis, the kind of systemic instability that produces figures like him in the first place. Here's the hook. If Trump is in trouble, it is because America itself is in trouble, and his predicament has become a mirror for the fractures running through the nation. Consider why Trump was able to rise at all. He tapped into discontent that had been festering for decades. Stagnant wages, vanishing job security, rising inequality, the hollowing out of entire communities by globalization and automation. Millions of Americans felt betrayed by both Democrats and Republicans, abandoned by a political system that seemed more interested in serving Wall Street than Main Street. Into that vacuum stepped Trump, promising to be the outsider who could smash the corrupt establishment and fight for the forgotten. His success was not an accident. It was the symptom of a society where economic despair and political dysfunction had reached a boiling point. The hook here is this: Trump's current troubles are not just personal scandals, they are symbols of a larger political decay. The legal cases, the endless headlines, the polarization they generate, all of these reflect a nation that has lost faith in its institutions. For some, Trump is proof that elites are out of control. For others, he is proof that populism has gone too far. Either way, the very fact that a figure like him dominates national politics speaks to the depth of America's divisions. His unraveling, therefore, does not heal those divisions. It exposes them more starkly. Think about how his battles play out in the public arena. Every indictment is treated by his supporters as evidence that the system is corrupt and rigged, while his critics see the same indictments as long overdue accountability. Two groups of Americans look at the same event and draw opposite conclusions. That is not just polarization. It is fragmentation, a society so divided that it cannot even agree on basic reality. Trump's troubles illuminate this problem. America no longer shares a common foundation of trust in its institutions, and that makes governing far more difficult, no matter who holds office. Another angle is how Trump's rise and struggles reflect the crisis of leadership in American politics. He is not alone in being flawed or controversial. He is simply the most extreme expression of a broader pattern: the inability of either party to address the root causes of discontent. Inequality, corruption, insecurity created fertile ground for someone like Trump to emerge. Now, as his image erodes, there is no clear alternative waiting to unite the country. Instead, we see rival factions, deep resentments, and a public increasingly cynical about whether politics can solve anything. Trump's downfall, if it comes, will not solve that crisis. It will only deepen the question of what comes next. Here's another hook. Trump's troubles expose the fragility of the so-called American dream. For decades, leaders promised that hard work would guarantee success, that the system was fair, that prosperity was shared. Yet millions of Americans watched their jobs disappear, their healthcare costs rise, and their children struggle harder than they did. Trump promised to restore that dream, but his own legal financial chaos highlights just how broken the dream has become. If even a man who once branded himself as the ultimate winner is now drowning in trouble, what does that say about the stability of the system itself? We should also remember that empires often show their cracks through the leaders they produce. Trump's troubles are not just about him bending the rules. They are about the rules themselves being vulnerable to manipulation. He thrived because the system allowed him to. He cut deals, exploited loopholes, and used populist anger to propel himself to the presidency. That he now faces consequences is less about individual justice and more about a system struggling to police itself after years of negligence. And when a society struggles to hold its most powerful figures accountable, it reveals something fundamental. The rule of law and the stability of democracy are not as firm as many once believed. And here's the final hook. When people look at Trump's troubles, they are not just watching a man. They are watching a nation wrestle with itself. Every courtroom appearance is also a test of whether America can confront its divisions. Every donor pulling back is also a sign of a shifting political landscape. Every supporter who questions him is also a reflection of broader disillusionment with the political class. Trump's troubles, in other words, are America's troubles. They tell us not only about the fate of one man, but about the state of a society at war with itself, uncertain about its future, and deeply divided over what kind of country it wants to be. Donald Trump's future is no longer written in the bold strokes of certainty it once carried. For years, he moved through politics with the momentum of inevitability, convincing both supporters and rivals that he was a force too large to stop. But now, with legal troubles mounting, financial strain intensifying, and cracks in his political base widening, the horizon ahead looks increasingly uncertain. And here's the hook: uncertainty in politics is not weakness alone. It is destabilizing. It creates openings for rivals, and it erodes the confidence that once seemed indestructible. Think about the unique position Trump is in. He is simultaneously a former president, a frontrunner for his party's nomination, and a defendant in multiple courtrooms. No American figure has ever faced such a collision of roles. That collision creates unpredictability. Will court rulings disqualify him from certain ballots? Will donors continue to fund a campaign that doubles as a legal defense fund? Will voters rally behind him out of sympathy or drift away out of exhaustion? These questions are not just speculation. They are the kind of uncertainties that shape the future of entire political movements. The hook here is that Trump's future does not rest in his hands alone. For all his bravado about being a master negotiator and a fighter who never quits, the truth is that judges, juries, prosecutors, donors, and even fellow Republicans now hold pieces of his destiny. That loss of control is itself a dramatic shift. Trump built his brand on dominance, on being the man who dictates terms. But as cases unfold, as allies hesitate, as rivals grow bolder, he finds himself reacting rather than commanding. And in politics, once you are reacting instead of leading, your power begins to slip away. Consider the Republican Party. For years, it bent to Trump's will, shaping itself around his personality rather than policy. But the uncertainty of his future creates space for new leaders. Governors, senators, and party strategists are watching closely, calculating whether sticking with Trump is a winning strategy or a risk too great to bear. They are not breaking with him outright. Many still fear his base, but they are preparing for scenarios in which he does not dominate as he once did. That quiet recalibration is a sign that even within his party, the assumption of his inevitability is fading. There is also the question of voters themselves. Trump's base has been fiercely loyal, but even loyalty has limits when fatigue sets in. The endless cycle of scandals, court dates, and controversies risks wearing down the very people who once rallied to his side. Voters want to believe in strength, in victory, in a leader who can carry them forward. If the narrative becomes one of constant defense of a candidate weighed by his own baggage, then the energy that once fueled his movement could begin to dissipate. That kind of uncertainty is dangerous in a political system where enthusiasm often decides turnout, and turnout decides elections. Here's another hook. Trump's uncertain future is not only about whether he wins or loses. It's about how America itself handles a leader under such extraordinary circumstances. If he manages to survive the legal storms and reclaim the presidency, it will confirm to millions that strength can overcome accountability. If he falls, whether through conviction, financial collapse, or political defeat, it will send a very different message about the limits of populist power in a polarized system. Either outcome will shape American politics for a generation And the fact that both remain plausible is what makes this moment so unprecedented. Uncertainty also extends beyond Trump personally to the system as a whole. The United States is being tested not only on whether it can prosecute or restrain a powerful figure, but also on how such trials affect its democracy. Does holding Trump accountable strengthen faith in institutions, or does it deepen the sense of division and persecution? Does removing him from the stage create space for healing, or does it spark further radicalization among his supporters? These are the unknowns that make his situation so volatile, so charged with possibility and danger at the same time. And here's the final hook. Trump's uncertain future is really America's uncertain future. His story has become so entwined with the nation's political fabric that his fate will inevitably alter the trajectory of both parties, the tone of public debate, and the confidence of the American people in their democracy. The man who once claimed to embody the voice of the forgotten now finds himself caught in a storm that could either end his influence or cement his place in history as the leader who defied the odds once again. And in that tension, in that unresolved, unpredictable struggle, lies the reason why the whole world is watching so closely.